May 15th, 1982. The rain was falling gently on the cobblestones of Montmartre as Alain Delon walked toward Le Breakup, the historic restaurant where he had agreed to meet Romy Schneider for what would be the last time. He had no idea that in exactly 14 days, the woman he had loved more than any other would be found dead in her Paris apartment, or that the words she would speak to him that evening would echo in his mind for the next 4 decades. Their love story had begun 24 years earlier, in 1958, on the set of the film Christine. Alain was 23, already establishing himself as one of France's most promising young actors. Romy was 20, a radiant Austrian beauty who had captured hearts across Europe with her performances in the Sissy films. When they looked at each other for the first time, something electric passed between them that everyone on set could feel. It wasn't just attraction, director Pierre Gaspard Huet later recalled. It was like watching two souls recognize each other. The chemistry was so powerful that I had to completely rewrite several scenes because what was happening between them off camera was more compelling than anything I had scripted. Their 5-year relationship became the stuff of legend. They were young, beautiful, talented, and desperately in love. The European press followed their every move, documenting romantic getaways to the French Riviera, glamorous premieres where they could barely keep their hands off each other, and quiet moments in cafes where they seemed to exist in a world that contained only the two of them. In 1959, they announced their engagement, and the continent celebrated. Wedding plans were made, venues were booked, and the press prepared for what promised to be the most spectacular celebrity wedding of the decade. But as their careers began to diverge and the pressures of fame intensified, cracks began to appear in their perfect romance. The end came in 1963, not with a dramatic fight or betrayal, but with a conversation that broke both their hearts. Alain had been offered a series of Hollywood films that would establish him as an international star, but accepting them would mean spending months away from Europe and from Romy. At the same time, Romy was being pressured by her family and management to marry someone more stable, someone who could give her the security and normalcy that a life with a fellow actor could never provide. We both knew that our careers were pulling us in different directions, Alain later recalled. We could have chosen love over ambition, but we were young and foolish enough to believe that we could have both. We thought we were postponing our happiness, not ending it. The breakup devastated both of them, but they handled it differently. Alain threw himself into his work, accepting more and more challenging roles and beginning the relationships with directors like Jean-Pierre Melville that would define his career. Romy also continued acting, but she seemed to be searching for something that eluded her, first in marriage to Harry Mayan, then in motherhood, then in a series of relationships that never quite filled the void that Alain had left. Over the years, they would cross paths at film festivals and industry events, always maintaining a polite distance that fooled no one who knew them. Friends reported that they never stopped asking about each other, never stopped following each other's careers, and never stopped comparing their current partners to the love they had lost. Alain ruined Romy for any other man, observed director Claude Sauté, who worked with both of them. And Romy ruined Alain for any other woman. They had found something perfect, and everything after that was just an attempt to recreate what they could never have again. By 1982, both their lives had taken tragic turns. Romy was struggling with depression and addiction, devastated by the death of her 14-year-old son, David, in July 1981. The boy had been killed in a freak accident while visiting his father, and Romy had blamed herself, convinced that her failed marriages and chaotic lifestyle had somehow contributed to the tragedy. Alain was also facing his own challenges. His relationships were troubled. His health was beginning to decline, and he was starting to confront the reality that he might never find the happiness that had seemed so close when he was young. It was in this context that Romy reached out to him in May 1982. The phone call came on a Tuesday evening while Alain was at home reviewing scripts. Her voice was different, older, sadder, but still unmistakably hers. "I need to see you," she said without preamble. "Just once more. There's something I need to tell you before it's too late." There was something in her voice that frightened him. This wasn't the confident, vivacious woman he had known. This was someone who sounded like she was saying goodbye. They met 3 days later at Le Procope, the restaurant they had frequented when they were young and in love. Alain arrived first and chose a corner table where they could speak privately. When Romy walked in, he was shocked by how thin and fragile she looked. The radiant beauty who had captivated Europe was still there, but she seemed translucent, as if she was already beginning to fade from the world. They talked for hours about their lives, their careers, their regrets. Romy spoke about David's death with a pain so raw that Alain found himself crying. She talked about her struggles with pills and alcohol, her failed attempts to find happiness, and her growing sense that she had wasted the gifts life had given her. "I keep thinking about the choices we made," she told him as the evening wore on. "All those years ago, when we chose our careers over each other. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we had been brave enough to choose differently?" Alain admitted that he thought about it constantly. He told her that every woman he had been with since had been compared to her, and that none had ever measured up to the memory of what they had shared. As the night grew later and the restaurant began to empty, Romy seemed to gather herself for something important. She reached across the table and took his hands in hers, hands that he noticed were shaking slightly. "Alain," she said, looking directly into his eyes with an intensity that reminded him of the girl he had fallen in love with all those years ago. "I need you to know something. I need you to understand that everything I've done since we broke up, every relationship, every marriage, every desperate attempt to find happiness, none of it was real. It was all just trying to forget you." She paused, and when she continued, her voice was barely above a whisper. "You were the only man I ever truly loved. You were the only one who ever really knew me. And I've spent 20 years pretending that wasn't true, but I can't pretend anymore." Alain felt his heart breaking all over again. He wanted to tell her that he felt the same way, that she had been his love of the life, that letting her go had been the biggest mistake he had ever made. But before he could speak, she leaned forward and whispered something in his ear that would haunt him for the rest of his life. What she whispered was this: "Promise me that when I'm gone, you won't let them say I died of anything except a broken heart, because that's the truth, Alain. I've been dying of missing you for 20 years. The words hit him like a physical blow. She wasn't just talking about their lost love. She was telling him that she was going to die, and soon. She was asking him to be the keeper of the truth about her death, to ensure that when the world tried to understand what had happened to Romy Schneider, someone would know that it wasn't just addiction or depression or accident. It was the slow death that comes from losing the one person who made life worth living. He tried to argue with her, tried to convince her that she could get help, that there was still time to find happiness, but she just smiled sadly and shook her head. "Some things can't be fixed, mon amour," she said, using the endearment she had called him when they were young. "Some loves are too big to survive losing them." 2 weeks later, on May 29, 1982, Romy Schneider was found dead in her Paris apartment. The official cause of death was cardiac arrest, brought on by a combination of alcohol and sleeping pills. The press speculated about suicide, depression, and the tragic life of a fading star. But only Alain knew the real truth. For 42 years, he kept her secret. He never spoke publicly about their final meeting, never revealed the devastating confession she had made to him that night in Montmartre. When reporters asked him about Romy's death, he would simply say that she had been struggling and that he missed her terribly. But privately, he was tortured by her words and by his own sense of guilt. He wondered if he could have saved her, if he should have broken his promise to her family and married her decades earlier, if their love story could have had a different ending. The secret became heavier as the years passed. Every May 29th, the anniversary of her death, he would visit her grave and whisper apologies for choices made long ago. Every time someone mentioned her name, he would remember her final words and feel the weight of the truth he was carrying alone. It wasn't until his own final interview, recorded just weeks before his death in August 2024, that Alain finally found the courage to reveal what Romy had told him that night. The interviewer had asked him about his greatest regret, and after a long pause, he decided that 42 years of silence was enough. "My greatest regret," he said, his voice heavy with decades of sorrow, "is that I let the love of my life die believing that I had forgotten her. Romy Schneider didn't die of pills or alcohol or depression. She died of a broken heart, and I broke it when I chose my career over our love." He went on to reveal the details of their final meeting and the promise she had made him make. As he spoke, tears ran down his face, tears that had been building for over 4 decades. "She asked me to make sure people knew the truth about why she died," he continued. "She wanted someone to understand that she hadn't given up on life because she was weak or addicted or mentally ill. She had given up because she had learned to live without the one thing that made her feel alive." The revelation sent shockwaves through the entertainment world. Suddenly, Romy's tragic death took on new meaning. She wasn't just another celebrity who had succumbed to the pressures of fame. She was a woman who had died of love, who had spent 20 years trying to forget the only man who had ever truly mattered to her. The impact of Alain's confession extended far beyond the entertainment industry. Psychologists and relationship experts began analyzing the case as an example of how profound love can transcend time and circumstance. The story resonated with people around the world who had experienced their own lost loves and wondered about the paths not taken. Dr. Marie-Claire Dubois, a specialist in relationship psychology, noted that Alain and Romy's story represented something increasingly rare in modern society. In an age of casual dating and easily broken commitments, their love story reminds us that some connections run so deep that they can define an entire life. The tragedy isn't just that they lost each other, it's that they never learned how to stop loving each other. The revelation also sparked renewed interest in both of their films from that era. Cinema scholars began reanalyzing their performances in the years after their breakup, looking for signs of the hidden pain they were both carrying. Many found new layers of meaning in their work, as if their art had been shaped by the love they had lost. Film critic Antoine Dufour wrote, "When you watch Romy's performance in César and Rosalie or Elaine's work in Le Samouraï, you can now see the shadow of their lost love in every scene. They weren't just acting, they were processing their grief in front of the camera." The interview also cast Alain's own life in a different light. People began to understand why he had never seemed completely happy despite his success, why his relationships always seemed to end in disappointment, why he had often seemed haunted by something he couldn't name. Friends and colleagues who had known both of them began sharing their own observations about the lasting impact of their relationship. Director Claude Sautet revealed that when he was casting Vincent, François, Paul, and the others in 1974, he had wanted both Alain and Romy for the leads, but Alain had specifically requested that she not be considered. "He told me it would be too painful," Sautet recalled. He said he couldn't pretend to be in love with someone else while looking into Romy's eyes. "That's when I realized that for him, their breakup wasn't something that had happened in the past. It was something he was still living through every day." Entertainment journalists noted that he had been asked about her death hundreds of times over the decades, and he had never once hinted at the truth she had shared with him. This loyalty impressed even his critics. Celebrity biographer Pierre Assouline acknowledged that his commitment to Romy's final wish demonstrated a level of integrity that is almost unknown in the entertainment industry. The revelation also provided new context for Romy's final months. Friends who had been with her in 1982 began sharing memories that took on new significance in light of Alain's revelation. Actress Marie-France Pizier revealed that Romy had spoken often about Alain in her final year. "She would bring him up in conversations that had nothing to do with him. I thought it was just nostalgia, but now I understand it was so much deeper." "Now I understand," said director Claude Lelouch after watching the interview. "Alain wasn't just grieving Romy's death. He was grieving the life they could have had together if they had been brave enough to choose each other." Today, the story of Alain and Romy's final meeting has become part of cinema legend. It's a reminder that some loves transcend death, so powerful they can haunt a person for a lifetime, and so tragic they can only be understood in the context of choices made and opportunities lost. When Alain died in August 2024, many noted that he seemed peaceful in a way he hadn't been in years. Perhaps having finally fulfilled his promise to Romy and told the world the truth about her death, he was able to let go of the guilt that had haunted him for so long. They are buried in different countries, she in France, he in Switzerland, but their love story has achieved a kind of immortality that few real-life romances ever attain. It reminds us that the greatest love stories are often the most tragic ones, and that some promises are worth keeping even when they break your heart to honor them. If this incredible story of love, loss, and a 42-year secret moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Share this video with someone who believes in true love. And tell us in the comments, would you keep such a heartbreaking promise for 42 years? Because sometimes the greatest act of love is carrying someone else's truth long after they're gone.